Hello, and welcome to Wicked Wednesday with the Collective. Tonight we're going to read The Robber Bridegroom by the Brothers Grimm. There once was a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and when she was grown up, he became anxious that she should be well married and taken care of. So he thought, if a decent suitor comes and asks for her in marriage, I will give her to him. Soon after, a suitor came forward who seemed very well to do, and as the miller knew nothing to complain about him, he promised him his daughter. But the girl did not seem to love him as a bride should love her bridegroom. She had no trust in him. As often as she looked at him or thought about him, she felt a chill in her heart. One day he said to her, "You are to be my bride, and yet you have never been to see me." The girl answered, "Well, I do not know where your house is." Then the bridegroom said, "My house is out there in the dark woods." She began to make excuses and said she could not find the way to it, but the bridegroom said, "You must come out to me and pay me a visit next Sunday. I have already invited company, and I will stew ashes on the path through the woods so that you will be sure to find it." When Sunday came and the girl was supposed to be set out on her way, she became fearful, and without quite knowing why, she filled both pockets full of peas and lentils. There were ashes strewn on the path through the wood, but nevertheless, at each step she cast to the right and left a few peas on the ground. So she went on the whole day until she came to the middle of the darkest wood, where it was the darkest. And there stood a house, not pleasant in her eyes, for it was dark and sinister. She entered, but there was no one there, and it was completely still. Suddenly, she heard a voice cry, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not abide, for here do evil things betide." The girl looked around and perceived that the voice came from a bird who was hanging in a cage by the wall, and again it cried, turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not abide, for here do evil things betide." Then the pretty bride went on from one room to another and walked through the whole house, but it was quite empty, with no soul to be found. At last she reached the cellar, and there sat an ancient woman who nodded. "Can you tell me," said the girl, "if my bridegroom lives here?" "Oh, poor child," answered the old woman. "Do you know what has happened to you? You are in a mine of murderers. You thought you were a bride and soon to be married, but death will be your spouse. Your bridegroom wants to take your life. Look here, I have a great kettle of water to set on, and when once they have you in their power, they will cut you in pieces without mercy, cook you and eat you, for they are cannibals. Unless I have pity on you and save you, you are lost." Then the old woman hid the bride behind a great cask. "Be still as a mouse," said the old woman. "Do not stir or move, or else you are lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have been waiting a long time for an opportunity to save me from their power." No sooner was it that the girl had been hidden when the wicked gang entered the house. They dragged another young maid with them. They were drunk and would not listen to her cries and groans. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow, which caused her heart to burst. Then they ripped off her fine clothes, lay her on a table. Then they cut her beautiful body in pieces and strew salt on it. The poor bride was all the while shaking and trembling behind the cask because she saw what a fate the robbers had intended for her. One of them noticed on the little finger of the murdered woman a golden ring, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took an axe and chopped it off, but the finger sprang up and fell on the bride's lap. The robber took up a light to look for it, but he could not find it. Then said one of the others, "Have you looked behind the great cask?" But the old woman cried, "Come and eat and leave off looking till tomorrow. The finger won't run away." Then the robbers said the old woman was right, and they left off searching and sat down to eat. And the old woman drugged their wine, for that before long they stretched themselves in the cellar, sleeping and snoring. When the bride heard that, she came from behind the cask and had to make her way among the sleepers lying all about the ground, and she felt very much afraid lest she might awaken any of them. But God helped her, and she passed luckily through, and the old woman with her, and they unlocked the door and made haste to leave that house of murderers. The wind had carried away the ashes from the path, but the peas and lentils had budded and sprung up, and the moonshine upon them showed the way. They went on through the night till in the morning they reached the mill. Then the girl related to her father all that had happened to her. When the wedding day came, the friends and neighbors assembled, the miller having invited them, and the bridegroom also appeared. When they were all seated at the table, each one had to tell a story. But the bride sat still and said nothing, until at last the bridegroom said to her, "Now, sweetheart, do you know no story? Tell us something." She answered, "I will tell you about a dream. I was going alone through a wood, and I came at last to a house, in which there was no living soul, but by the wall was a bird in a cage, who cried, 'Turn back, thou pretty bride. Within this house thou must not abide, for here do evil things betide.' And then the bird repeated its chorus, 'Sweetheart, it is only a dream.' Then I went through all the rooms, and they were all empty, and it was so dark and sinister. At last I went down into the cellar, and there sat an ancient woman. She nodded her head. I asked her if my bridegroom lived in that house, and she answered, 'Ah, poor child, you have come into a mine of murders. Your bridegroom does live here, but he will kill you and cut you into pieces, and then cook and eat you.' 'Sweetheart, it is only a dream.' But the old woman hid me behind a great cask, and no sooner had she done so than the robbers came home, dragging with them a young maid, and they gave her to drink wine thrice, white, red, and yellow, and because of that her heart burst. 'Sweetheart, it is only a dream.' And they killed her, and then they ripped off her fine clothes and cut her into pieces and strew salt on her. 'Sweetheart, it is only a dream.' And one of the robbers saw a gold ring on the finger of the young woman, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took an axe and chopped it off. But the finger sprang up and fell on my lap, and here is the finger with the ring." At these words she drew it forth and showed it to the company. The robber bridegroom, who during the story had grown deadly white, sprung up and wanted to escape. But the guests held him fast and delivered him up to justice, and then he and his whole gang were executed for their evil deeds.